There is one step I run before every brand identity project to ensure the best outcome for myself and my clients. And most designers skip this step completely, which is then cause them a headache, unnecessary hours spent, and 0 to no results for their clients. And no, it's not a mood board, it's not a discovery call, it's a structured workshop, which is you're probably told by the title of the video. And without it, you're basically designing blind. In this video, I'm walking you through the exact framework that I use and why it helps me to have less revisions and better outcomes for my clients. So let's firstly talk about how it usually went with me and with probably many other people. So you receive a brief, you get the brief filled in. So what you usually do is you might send some questionnaire to a client and then the client fills it in and then you work based on this. Or in even rare scenarios, but probably there are some people who do that, you don't send anything, you just ask, hey, what do you want? And you then design based on what the client wants. So it's usually two of the cases. You either send the questionnaire or you don't do anything, you just ask the questions and that's it. Again, you might go to the discovery call. That's another option, which is okay. But still, most of the time, that was not enough. And the problem with that was that a lot of time, there wasn't any proper direction. There wasn't anything that is based off of something. It mainly was based off of what the client wanted, and not what could actually work in reality. And then what I've noticed as well, that later on, you end up doing something purely based off of something very abstract. So you're basically designing based on vibes. And that usually leads to a very fucked up pass. And that fucked up pass usually means that you then would most likely end up with the thousands of revisions because again, you don't have the base ground of what you agreed upon. So it's all based off of the questionnaire, which again, in my personal experience, in like 99% of the cases is very vague because again, it's not the client's responsibility to know how to answer it, right? They don't know, for example, if you ask things like, hey, what's your vision? They might fill in something, or hey, what's your values? They might fill in certain values, but in reality, they might be either abstract or they might not even portray what the actual values are. So that leads you to a path where you get endless revisions, where you cannot land on a kind of one single direction, and that leads you to a point where client gets disappointed because you deliver something that isn't quite aligned. You go back and forth with trying to deliver something, and then you end up with something that kind of looks like what they wanted, but kind of not. So again, the whole process becomes like incredible mess. So that is something that I've noticed did not work, and that's why I have established this brand strategy workshop that now helps me. So first of all, before I dive into the brand workshop and how it looks and what it is, let's define what is the brand identity workshop, or should I say the brand strategy workshop. So it's a facilitated session, in this case by me, with a goal to lead the client from point A, from the beginning of the call, to point B, to established points, with me kind of trying to facilitate it, direct the client, and actually get to the destination with the easiest and what's most importantly, the fun part. And so the way I do it is that I have, before the project started, before I jump into any visual, I have 2-hour brand strategy workshop. And it's usually divided by 2 sessions. So meaning we have a week. Let's say we have one brand strategy workshop on Monday. Then the next brand strategy workshop would be either on Tuesday or on Wednesday, because I've noticed that if I try to squeeze in 2 hours of a workshop on the same day, first of all, I get quite tired, and also specifically the client, they get quite tired as well, because that's quite daunting for them to think and think and think. So that's why, for myself, I find it best to kind of separate those 2 workshops. And the way they happen is they happen online. Usually we jump on a Google Meet or Zoom call, and then everything happens within the Figma where I facilitate this workshop. And the main goal of this workshop is to identify the same things that are important to be translated to the brand identity. Things such as how they want to be positioned in the market, things such as their vision, things such as their mission, the values, and the overall strategical layer of the brand and how their whole communication would be shaped. Because it's not only important for the brand identity, it's also important for any communication that they would have in the future when it comes down to their marketing. It's all going to always be tied to the brand strategy, which is going to be like, this guiding point to the whole marketing journey. So now I'm going to grab my laptop and I'm going to show you the actual workshop bit by bit and how then you can implement it in your strategy as well. So here we are in a Figma file. As I mentioned before, I have it split for 2 sessions. First that I run, let's say on Monday, and then another on Wednesday. And the first, which I call session 1, which is a foundation one, is mainly dedicated to trying to figure out what they are as a brand. And then the second one is more about positioning and how they want to be separated amongst their competitors. If we dive deep into each, the first one starts with what I call the obituary, and it takes about 10 minutes. So the goal of this first exercise is to uncover their mission and vision. And the way I do it is from going with the opposite. You can also see the notes. This is the notes that I kind of leave for myself, so I can always know what are the things that I need to keep in mind here. Of course, I delete them before the workshop itself. For example, in here, I always say that, for example, let's imagine that your company shuts down tomorrow. What's going to be the headline and what did the world lose? And what it helps people is that they don't think from the perspective of how good we are and what our mission is. They start to be thinking about what people missed. And when they start thinking about what people missed, it helps to be less vague, because now they're going to be going to these nitty-gritty details about they missed X, Y, and Z instead of just going abstract. And also that allows me to then ask the follow-up questions. Of course, the most important part about the workshop is asking the follow-up questions, not just them doing the due diligence here. For example, I asked them the opposite. What does the market look like if you succeed instead and you don't close? And so that helps to identify their mission and vision. Then the second one would be the value card sort. So in here, I have a predefined list of the values that they need to choose from. Again, you can have an amount of here, but that's what I've noticed work in 99.9% of the cases. And so the way it works is that I ask them to color the top 5 into green, and I give them about 2 minutes. And then I ask them to remove 2 that feel true, but kind of anyone could say. And then for each remaining, which is going to be 3, I ask them to give a real example, to give a huge elaborate answer. Because, for example, let's say they select loyalty, generosity, and honesty. Like, it doesn't give anything. Like, honesty can be described in so many things. So I ask them to actually give examples that it's been used before in the communication, in positioning, in something, so that it's not just a word, but actually what describes it. So the main goal of this one is not just pick the words, but actually first pick the words and then ask the follow-up things. And then the next thing is trying to build a persona here. So in here, this is like a template for them. First, they identify how they want to be taught, so how they want to be talking. Then they identify what would be the things that they would never say. So for example, this is the reference here. We are passionate about innovation, synergy, best-in-class solutions. So for example, that gives them an idea of how it should be framed. Then how they show up in a meeting as, so that they're actually now starting to build a persona out of it. So pretty much the person who already read the brief, had 3 specific questions ready, and ends the call 10 minutes early because everything got covered. So we are actually describing from a brand an actual persona here. Then the biggest pet peeve and what people say behind their back. So in here, that's the step where we are kind of building the persona. And this is the step where we don't really facilitate much. It's actually something that client just fills in. And before I move, also the thing about it is that then after you've finished, you need to gather this and kind of without the client, right? And find some balance between everything. So in here, the goal is to have as much as possible. And then when you go yourself and work on it, you need to find kind of the middle ground between the balance of what the client filled in. And then the last for the strategy number 1 day is origin timeline. So in here, what I ask the client to do is to show their brand story. And first they need to be talking about the before. So what was broken in the market, then the moment. So when they decided to build this, then the hardest part, what kind of made them stop in what they're doing right now. And then the last, the proof. So what was the point when they realized, all right, that's working. There is something in this. And again, you can always ask follow-up questions. Again, I don't have the exact follow-up questions that you can ask, but generally that's based on the overall communication that you have with the client during the call. Now to the day 2. So in the day 2, it's all about the positioning. So in here, even though I mentioned that I don't really send the questionnaire here, this is the step where I send it before. Again, just because I've noticed when the client fills them on a call, not only it takes a lot of time, it also makes me a bit hard to figure the things out. So this, let me just zoom in here. This questionnaire that I send it before the call. And then when we hop on a call, I actually try to clarify those bits here and try to finalize it with the client on a call, because usually some of the things might not be filled in as correctly as it is. So again, that's my goal as a designer, to navigate the client and explain to them like, hey, there's something wrong here, or hey, what did you mean about this? And if I to walk you through this, I talk here about their target audience here, about their competitors, about their strength, for example, why somebody should hire my client over their competitors. So things that would help them to be positioned differently. And so after this filled in, we hop on a call, as I mentioned. We do this as a first step. And then as we finalize it, this takes about 30 minutes. This is quite long. When that's done, we move to the next one, which is brand perception. And in here, it's quite self-explanatory. Again, of course, it has the predefined values. Again, you can fit them to your own specific needs. I just found these ones to be the best in almost majority of the projects. So what I asked the client to do is to pull those triggers of how they want to be perceived. They want to be serious or playful? They want to be reliable or brave? They want to be minimalist or maximalist? Friend or authority? Elite or mass appeal? Or mature and classic, or young and innovative? And again, the thing is here is that let's say the client filled in that they want to be minimalist, elite, mature. But then in the process, we realized that this positioning is kind of taken. Again, this is my goal as a designer to navigate the client and explain, hey, what if we still keep the elite and minimalist, but we pull the friend trigger, for example, to authority? And that could kind of give us a positioning leverage here. So this works as a base foundation of how the client sees and what they want to be perceived as, but then it's your end goal as a designer to figure the things out and help to direct the client towards kind of what they want to be. And then the last thing is brand positioning workshop. So in here, what I pretty much doing is before the call, I'm trying to plug in all of their competitors and trying to figure out where they stand in this XY axis. And the reason that it says TBD here is because there is no one rule of what you want to have here. It all depends on the client to client and on the industry to industry. For example, you could have something like friend, authority, mass market, niche, right? For example. And so let's say if majority of people are positioned over here, let's say they're positioned in authority and niche, we might want to be in here, which is friend and mass market, for example, right? So the goal here is to position their competitors, and then alongside of this workshop that we had here and this, to try to figure out what's kind of the best positioning for my client. And in here, there's a huge guide to it in terms of what you need to write over here, because again, there's no one rule. So you need to figure out based on your industry of the client, I mean, on the client's industry, what could work the best here. And there you have it. So as a result, what you will have is that you will have a client who will feel involved, and they will have less resistance that if you are to go and establish the brand identity to be against certain decisions, because they will have this brand strategy that they knew that they spent their 2 hours on it, instead of you sending a questionnaire that they probably would fill in on a Sunday evening and chuck it to you on Monday, which they would have no attachment whatsoever. Also, you will have everything that you have to make decisions confidently and strategically, not just based off of 3 values and 1 mission statement that client filled in that probably would be incorrect. Also, the revisions would drop because, as I mentioned before, direction was agreed before, and then overall the project would move faster, communication would be cleaner, and then the client would actually see a strategist in you and not just a person who just fucking executes everything without actually thinking about anything other than design part of it. And now, if you want to have a deeper look and try it yourself, I'm giving it away completely for free. There is a link in the description to the Figma file which you can open and copy to your workspace. But there is one thing that I need to mention, that this workshop, it does not live in a vacuum. You can always adjust it to your specific needs. You can always change the certain things, because there's no right or wrong answer here. It's just the workshop that I established for myself, that I've seen many, many times working for my personal clients. So feel free to change whatever there. And I'll see you in the next one. Ciao.